Well, today
Good afternoon.
we are and good afternoon indeed. It has been quite a week in sports entertainment, hasn't it?
Oh yeah. What? Where do we start? Well, I mean, conductor, please lead.
Well, probably uh, the obvious choice is that Vince McMahon has stated publicly that he is retiring and is stepping away from World Wrestling Entertainment at 77 years old. I'm sure that the controversy with him paying millions of dollars to young female workers in the company to remain quiet about an affair they were having probably fuels that quite a bit. But this has always been Vince's show. And Stephanie is, as of right now, has stepped back into the company after leaving it a few weeks ago. And so it's still going to be a McMahon venture. This is now a third generation McMahon company.
Yes.
But
And Stephanie. Let's interject that people thought it was a very questionable choice with her running the company, but in reality, she and this is confirmed by various sources, she displays a lot of the same ruthlessness that the old man has. So just in female form.
yeah, and she has not been outside that company, since she was a teenager. I know I've tried to figure out what happened with Shane um, over the years. He did leave the company professionally for quite a while, and Stephanie was there. Um, I've heard all kinds of rumors that uh, it had a lot to do with Triple H and the roles that he's had. I don't really know for sure, um, but from everything I've heard, Stephanie is the apple that fell very close to the tree of Vince McMahon, and Shane was not necessarily as close.
Now, from the scuttlebutt I've heard over the years, and just talking to various wrestlers over the years who have been even associated with Shane over the years and Stephanie, is that my beginning statement is true. Stephanie displays more of the old man's ruthlessness, and Shane, while he idolizes, Vince, he is more inclined to be like Linda McMahon. So,
Yeah,
he didn't have that same, while he would have been a great choice and has a lot of great ideas, uh, as far as business ruthlessness, it wasn't there. So and Shane stepped away. He stepped away probably 2009 time period, 2010, and actually started. He got in very early in the streaming business over in China and made himself a small fortune over there as well. Sold his WWE stocks completely out, like at the time, completely out. I'm not sure how he is now with that, but um, and getting back into the stock thing, Vince McMahon is still the majority stockholder in
yeah,
WWE, so he is not completely gone per se. You
yeah.
know what I mean? He
But
still retains his interest.
he does. From my understanding, though, a lot of that went towards the deal he made. Even though he has X amount of percent of the company stock, his vote, when it comes to things being presented to the board, is still ways away. If he had 5% of the stock, and I'm just guessing because I don't know how much it is, he had like 80% of the vote. Um, so he'll still retain his stock, but
Mhm.
stepping away from CEO, from again my understanding, that's going to do away with the influence that he's wielded as CEO or the head of creative for like the last month while they've sorted out the hush money stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see how things kind of land once all the dust settles with this.
Yeah, and you know what? I've often said this, and I maintain it. The I think at this point, him stepping away was, I mean, for obvious reasons, it was a smart move on Vince's part. Step away and deal with the personal things that he is going through right now. I think 77-year-old Vince McMahon wants to do that. I think if it was 57-year-old Vince McMahon, we'd have a completely different conversation, because the 57-year-old Vince McMahon would want to fight. The 20 years later 77-year-old Vince McMahon, probably not so much. Like, now it's different. He has grandchildren, and he's very up there, and looks, I mean, from the last few television appearances, while he still looks in great shape for a guy his age, he's very tired. Like 40 years plus of doing the same thing, maybe even longer, maybe 50 years of doing the same thing day in, day out, wears on anybody. I don't care who you are. And
Yeah.
Vince is no exception. He, and for years, he was probably the best at putting on the biggest front of all time, like, as far as like strong CEO businessman for this many years. I think now at this point, really, I mean, he's a multi-billionaire now. He's, like I said, he has grandchildren. He has a home in Florida. Why? You know what I mean? Like, if it
What
was
is
any,
left for him to do at this point?
right, and you think about it, he's taken WWE to, in pro wrestling in general, to greater heights than any man ever dreamt of doing. Most people didn't think he could pull it off, but Vince, being the ruthless businessman that he was absolutely ruthless in his path. Also, hired some of the best people he could find in business, and in their various fields, and helped make WWE this global brand.
Yep.
So,
And those people that he put together for his inner circle back in the very, very early 80s, these were ride or die people. They were with that company until the day they died, and their influence
yep,
was notable.
yep,
And it was also notable after they passed away. Like, I think of Gorilla Monsoon,
yep.
obviously Pat Patterson.
Mhm.
So it is a really interesting kind of pickle that he finds himself in right now.
Yeah, and as a fan, and we're in the same boat, and I know a lot of my friends that have been old school WWE, WWF lifers know the significance of this end of the era, of chapter of WWE. We knew that one day there would be a WWE without Vince McMahon. We just, now that the day has come, it's almost unbelievable to even think about. Even at Vince's tired state,
Yeah.
you cannot picture that company without Vince involved somehow, some way, some form. You just
Well,
can't.
yeah, because throughout our entire lives, that has been the product.
Yeah, and Vince is the master of the no sell. Whether he is no selling in business, or he's no selling in the ring. Um, you know, Vince wasn't the greatest performer in the ring. Let's just say, in those confrontations with Steve Austin and various others. Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
he was a tater machine.
Yeah, and I have loved all the videos about the Stone Cold Stunner that he took this year
Oh
back at
my god,
Mania.
the Mick Foley one was the best. Like
Yeah.
that belly laugh that Mick Foley had, and I know it had to have been exaggerated for social media spice, but um yeah,
Maybe not exaggerated that much because that looked awful.
he just could never properly sell a stunner.
Yep.
Go back to the beginning when he got his first one, and it was September 22nd, 1997. I want to say this
Do you
was
really remember the exact date?
yes, it was the Raw. That Raw was the first Raw at Madison Square Garden, because that was the night where Mick Foley, who we just spoke of, came back as Cactus Jack in WWF. And he
Yeah.
got the massive pop, and had a great match with Triple H,
Yes.
whom he had been working with all summer as Mankind / Dude Love. So, Yeah, I certainly remember that date. Of course,
Yeah, I
it
I
was a big deal for Vince McMahon to be touched, and they
yeah
built that up for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, if you remember, because that was when Austin got the neck injury, and he was going through the various officials. You know what I mean? Him beating up Sergeant Slaughter, okay, Sarge is a former pro wrestler, as well as various others, but Vince was never a wrestler. So
yeah
for Vince to, for Austin to get his hands on Vince, that was a big deal. And to have it be done at Madison Square Garden, which back then, when that building really, well, it still means something today, but back then, it really, the emphasis meant something. Where
yeah
if it happened in the Garden, it was shit was going down,
yeah,
basically.
and this was right around the birth of Mr. McMahon.
Yes, because this wasn't too terribly far behind the Montreal Screwjob. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Thinking of the McMahons and their roles in the business and this company, some of the most incredible spots ever were Shane diving off the Titantron, the coast to coast with trash cans. I mean, he really did give his body, probably body, mind, and soul, to the company when he was involved in it. And I'm thinking back to the invasion era. There's all these different factions that were former promotions. Linda, Stephanie, Shane, and Vince. I think that had a lot of potential at the time that didn't really pan out too well. But
yeah.
in regards to Stephanie, I mean, it's very obvious now that Stephanie is the heir apparent to the McMahon company. And as you mentioned, Triple H now is back as the executive vice president of talent relations.
Yes. Big move,
Eh,
and and the right move, in my opinion, because if you and anybody can argue this to death, but I will argue it by saying, look at NXT and look at what he did to that original NXT concept. He had it to where the character development was such, the storyline writing was such, and the television production was such that by 2015, 2016, 2017, it was the hottest product in WWE,
Yeah,
bar none. People could say what they want about the two big brands, Raw and SmackDown, but everyone had something really good to say about NXT and the amount of talent, good talent, that was being cranked out at the time. Now, when they got to the main roster, that was a completely different story, but when they were in NXT, they were taken care of and they were done right. And it's not only Triple H, it was his team that he had in place. It was your Terry Taylor, it was William Regal, it was
Dusty.
Dusty, Sarah Del Rey. You had these the talent that was put in place. Also, I believe Norman Smiley and Albert later and Bill DeMont
Yeah,
also had a lot to do with it too. Um, so the talent that they had in place to get those talents up to where they were, who a lot of them were essentially starting from scratch, but you know with time, they became the hottest properties in WWE
yeah,
and in pro wrestling in general. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, Charlotte has come out and she is gangbusters, like probably the best out of that whole class of that time and under Triple H's tenure. I
yeah.
mean, she's top of the pops, for performers.
So diving through the history, um, before we start touching on other things outside of the Vince story, you and I have been talking for a while. I said that it looks like they were. I imagine Vince specifically was just restructuring the company. A whole lot of things like the 80 some odd people that were either not renewed or were cut, some huge name stars. I've been thinking that he wanted to sell the company. It looks like that they are doing away with the brand split. NXT got rebooted. Now, so there's all these different moving parts. But what do you see in the very near future with Taking into account this controversy with Vince, but Stephanie at the helm, and in your grand opinion, what do you think is going to happen in the very near future for the company with Stephanie in the big chair now?
Well, let's go back a trace and WWE Network moving to Peacock, which was a big deal, and it netted them a lot of money, to license that content
It
for
was $1 billion, I think. I get a real
yeah,
billion.
for 5 years to retain the license. And many people said, why? Because WWE Network was its own thing. It was an innovator in streaming platforms. So in a lot of ways, and again, things that Vince and his production team don't get credit for, much like the XFL production, which was later adapted by the NFL, all the innovative camera angles and stuff like that, which Vince never got credit for back in the day. Now he's gotten the credit, but back then he did not, and got it was just that's a whole nother ball of wax. But we go back to that, and then the releases, which it wasn't so much the releases that in the amount. I mean, the amount of releases was alarming, but you got to look back in the context of WWE. They had so much talent, so much talent. We're
Yeah.
talking like it was WCW levels, maybe even bigger than WCW levels. And it wasn't the amount of talent that was let go. It was the fact that they let go some top names. I mean, when they let go Bray Wyatt and they let go Braun Strowman, who were proven draws in
Brian
within.
Danielson.
Yeah, and they let his contract run out. Paige recently let her contract run out. It's not the amount of people, because people have gone through and cycled out of WWE over the years. I mean, they've always had their was it the spring cuts and the Christmas cuts, I think.
Yeah.
Were always like the two times. It was like right after WrestleMania and then right in the Christmas holiday, where they would always cut guys and girls. You know what I mean? That's that, but it was like the sheer amount, and then the fact that they cut these high these talents that actually meant something to the WWE brand in recent memory. That was more alarming to me
Yeah,
than the
because
actual releases.
we're not looking at one or two. I mean, there are main event guys, needle movers, and some of them have been there for the majority of their career. And so, for so many uh, big fish to slip out to that uh, at the time smaller pond in AEW was very curious to me.
Yeah, and that the Peacock thing, and then that I mean, one, and of course, Vince coming out saying we're always open to do business, meaning like we're always open to hear negotiations, whether it's to sell the company or not to sell it, or to license something or whatever. I mean, WWE's has their licensing footprint on a lot of stuff, more than people realize. And Vince, again, I mean, I'm sure if the price was right, he would have sold out a long time ago. Really, before all this stuff would have happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Those things were clear, and then the hiring of Nick Khan, of course, who his main objective was to eliminate house shows completely
Yeah.
and go to like an arena format, meaning like a big stadium format where you're doing like 8 shows a year, but you're drawing X amount of people, and then just doing television every week, which was a I think cutting out. I mean, it works for AEW, but cutting out house shows completely. See, I don't know. Like that one's a toss up for me. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
house shows should completely go away, because how else are the wrestlers that are on the main roster going to learn their craft? You can't learn it television to television. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? In the performance center, they're trying to crank out new talent. So you have the talent that's on current television. They're How are they going to learn? How are they going to learn what works and what doesn't? You know?
And, and I had a thought recently taking a look at all of the uh, influences from Hollywood and a lot of celebrities being brought in um, and being included. Like you had Steve-O in the or Johnny Knoxville in the Royal Rumble.
Well,
Um,
Steve too, back in the 2000s, if you remember, Umaga squashed him.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
and so that's right. I did forget about that.
Oh, I
The
did. He no sold it, and Umaga beat the crap out of him because
yeah,
he got the splash, and if you see the footage back, Steve-O's laughing after getting the splash. It's basically like if you fall on your funny bone and you just start laughing really, really hard. He kind of sold it like that, but Umaga, of course, saw that he no sold, and he kept like just really putting the boots to him,
yeah,
or the foot to him, I should say, because Umaga didn't wear
yeah.
shoes.
And
So
you can either sell or he's going to make you hard sell. So
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's the one guy you don't want to no sell, which
yeah,
that Umaga I speak of.
yeah.
So
But we saw, like I know Bad Bunny has a tremendous amount of followers on social media.
mhm.
Um, and so we started to see a lot more, and maybe it was because of the pandemic. I don't know. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. But we to me, this resembles quite a bit to the rock and wrestling era, going back to the very beginning of WrestleMania. Um, they had the lumberjack match last year, I believe, with zombies on the
Yep.
outside to kind of plug Batista's zombie movie. And so
And props to the Miz in that match. I mean, the Miz, you could say what you want about him, but
that's a
he
team player.
right, and he had to make chicken shit in the chicken salad in that match, and he did a damn good job.
Yeah.
All props to the Miz. So
So do you think with Nick Khan's business model that they're working towards and the inclusion of celebrities in Hollywood that social media is going to become the new house show in a way? Like you can go around to a huge stadium for all the major pay-per-views, but if you want to see something, you have to turn into a live stream instead of going to a live show.
uh, and I know TNA is okay. So and I know TNA Impact has done this with Twitch, so it's nothing new. Um, it's a matter of how they're going to execute it, really, because yeah, the old business model of house shows are very much played out nowadays due to the sheer amount of television, which I sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm really not. And at
Yeah,
the same time, because I'm between a rock and a hard place on this because well, again, I think house shows now do I think they should do a lot of house shows? Probably not.
yeah,
I think it should be trimmed back quite a bit, you know what I mean? And do house shows in the areas where are going to draw money, because of course WWE is a money drawing company. They don't want to lose money. They want to make as much money as humanly possible.
yeah.
So, go to the markets that are proven that work, and you know what I mean, and
S-
go from there. uh, this is such a hard question to answer because
I know.
Nick Khan's method of running the 8 shows a year in a stadium thing, I mean, and having the guys and girls learn on television, you know what I mean, like week to week, that's one thing. But you have guys and girls that aren't gonna um like if they work if they were used to working 5 days a week and now they're trimmed back down to two, it's like, yeah, the bodies get rest, yes, but they're never going to learn anything to get them to break them through to the next level. I
It,
just can't fathom it, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, and I think a lot of wrestling fans can't either. The concept, I mean, Nick Khan's concept is not dissimilar to like Vern Gagne's concept, where he would run the once a month at the big, um, he would always run once a month at like St. Paul Civic Center and sell it out like 20,000, 18, 20,000 people or whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Vern created that business model a long time ago. So that's nothing new. But Vern would run house shows throughout. So it's because this was, of course, before the days of television. He would run house shows and he would tape televisions in the studio.
yeah,
So you know, there has to be some sort of balance, is what I'm saying, between both. You know what I mean? I don't
yeah.
think Nick Khan has the wrong idea in running the stadiums because, yeah, why not? You're going to get 70,000 plus or 50,000 plus wherever you're going to go. Yeah.
That's great for business on every angle.
Yeah, and maybe let's theorize this. Maybe maybe he's taking the less is more approach. You know?
But so you have Nick Khan's business model, and from my understanding from the headlines that I've seen, Stephanie and Nick Khan are kind of like joint CEOs, and so you have Nick Khan's uh, business mind and Stephanie's wrestling creative. And she's a McMahon through and through, and so if
Yeah.
if this business is going to succeed the way that it has, and to continue to, you need a McMahon there. So do you think that with all of the changes that Nick Khan is doing and planning on doing, that where does it work? And in the immediate, Vince is drawing all kinds of headlines to wrestling, um, and WWE is pretty popular all over. But
Mhm.
do you think that a drastic change for their business model, like what you were talking about, what Nick is doing, even with Stephanie in there, is going to work?
Got to be the proper balance. You know what I mean? Now, what Stephanie is going to come up with in the future is a whole nother ball of wax, and a whole nother story entirely. And if her ideas are actually going to be implemented or not, you know what I mean? Or will more of the Nick Khan influence come in? I don't know. You know what I mean? It looked, and we were totally rounding about our questions, but to get back to whether or not the company definitely looked like it was positioned to be sold. I would say within the last year and a half. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? For sure. You know, uh, who was going to buy it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I
Disney.
heard various stories of who was in the running. However, now with the TV 14 thing, like I had said off air, I think Disney's completely off the table on that one. So we can eliminate Disney
Dis-
possibly.
Disney just put Logan and the two Deadpool movies on Disney Plus to stream. Those are the first R-rated movies ever on Disney Plus. Just
Really?
yeah, yeah. Just in the
Okay.
last
So
couple days,
see,
those have been put up there. So I don't know.
I didn't know that, and I know that they own a lot of the 20th Century Fox catalog, which, of course, that's a whole nother thing too. But
Yeah,
you know, so maybe they're not out of the running.
yeah. And so the only other thing that I really wanted to pick your brain about before we start going, roundabout to all the other significant end of an era people and moments. Um, Stephanie had left
Yep.
WWE. I think it was a couple months ago before this um, started. So Triple H had his cardiac incident the end of last year, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And
And yeah, and that had, I mean, that was a real thing. That had nothing to
oh yeah,
do with.
yeah,
And you
and
know what? If I were Triple H, in the position that he was in before, that does not surprise me that he worked himself into something like that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because he had a lot of shit to do on his plate before that heart attack happened. So I mean, and that
yeah,
Vince McMahon is a cyborg, whereas Triple H is a normal man. He's a very strong man, but he's a normal man.
yeah,
And yeah, that totally got that grind. I think got him.
yeah.
And
But you have Triple H with that, and then coming into this year and again in the last couple of months, Stephanie leaves. Said that with what happened with Triple H, she wants to focus more on her family. Usually, I think that's just like a BS headline, and I think it is here too for the most part. But I also think that there is probably something very legitimate to that
I,
with Triple
I
H.
yeah, I think that's the truth of the matter, because that was a real thing, and it did really happen. But
Yeah,
I'm going to spitball it by saying that Stephanie knew these were coming, the
yeah,
allegations were coming, and she wanted to get out of Dodge. Or Vince had said, "Hey, this is what's up, and you're better off going to the side here, so that way your name is not involved and entangled
Yeah.
with my name." You know what I mean? I'm spitballing it here, but these
Well,
scenarios probably could have happened.
yeah, and this was where I was trying to get to with my long-winded question style. But so Stephanie leaves, and then all these scandals break,
Yep.
and I was I really wanted to kind of pick your brain about that because do you think Stephanie uh, left at the behest of Vince to kind of shield her, or do you think maybe she was fed up and frustrated with everything and really just didn't want to do this anymore? No.
If she didn't want to do this, why would she be back in the position that she is?
Well, with Vince gone, when he was there a couple months ago, she was in a different spot in the company doing kind of a different job. So with Vince being gone now, the Iron Throne is open to her. So
Yeah,
I've just been wondering if she left to avoid some of the splash damage of all the
had
headlines. Yeah,
had to have, because again, why would she even? So you're going to go from this position where she was, I think she was like a brand ambassador before, right?
yeah,
So basically, she would go out and she would spread the word of WWE, it's everywhere, and in any form, in any fashion, and into the media and whatever, right? But why would she? Okay, other than time, of course, because she is a mom, time with her kids, of course.
yeah.
Her and Triple H have 3 daughters. Uh, but also the heart attack thing, which was that yeah,
That's
what's
scary.
wrong with what's wrong with wanting to take a leave of absence for your husband? Sorry, your husband just happens to be Triple H. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
yeah.
an important cog in the WWE wheel that turned, so but that's I think it was a combination of the two. I mean, I think the timing on that where she left couldn't have been more perfect. The time she stayed away, could that have been a shield? Maybe by Vince or others she worked with, knowing that these scandals were going to break. Yeah, you know what I mean. And I think that that was the case because again, why would she just come back and take that Vince McMahon position if she wouldn't have taken the position if she wasn't being shielded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And now that the McMahons have a board of directors to answer to,
Yeah.
and this is it's still a family business, but not like it was, and way back. There are people that they are accountable to.
And also understated, when was the last time Stephanie McMahon was embroiled in this kind of scandal? You know what I mean? Or any scandal.
I really can't even think of one.
Right. I mean, besides the whole
Macho Man.
whether the Macho Man Randy Savage rumors from when she was a teenager, which those have never been confirmed at all. So they've all just been hearsay. But when is the last time she's ever been involved in anything scandalous? Really, not never, right?
Yeah, that's a good
So
point. Yeah,
yeah, so again, that plays into the fact that her being queen of the throne too.
yeah,
But of course, that came with almost immediately. That came with the Triple H package where he's I'm back and he's back resuming his position again. So you knew Triple H wasn't going to be
yeah.
far away from the involvement with WWE. That's what he was groomed to do, and he wasn't
Mhm.
groomed to do that by marrying in the family or whatever. That was by Vince, and that was by Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon wanted Triple H to. He wanted Triple H to retire back in like 2012, I think, or something like that, or
Mhm.
maybe even earlier to take a office position. And Triple H fought it, fought it, fought it, fought it because the performer in him still had a lot in the tank and still had a lot to prove. It was Vince who was pushing it.
Yeah.
So, not
Trying,
Hunter.
yeah, trying to figure out what really would be best for business and best for him personally.
Right. Right. And that was the balance with Hunter where, how can you separate, again, I have to cite NXT and his
Yeah.
involvement in NXT is he proved that he can be given something and make it into a very, very, very hot property
Yeah.
because he knows professional wrestling. And that was the side, I think, and this is the genius behind Vince McMahon, is he's able to see things that other people aren't able to see. Yeah,
Yeah.
like other people aren't able, you know what I mean? Like, why the hell do you think he brought back Warriors so many goddamn times? You know what I mean?
Yep.
It, Vince isn't an idiot. If he can make money off of something, or if he sees something that nobody else sees, he's gonna do it, and he's gonna exploit it to the fullest. So,
Yeah.
and Triple H being no exception. He knew, and from all accounts from the Click members, everyone in that clique knew that Triple H had the best mind for the business. Shawn Michaels himself has said it.
Yeah.
All of them have said it. You know what I mean? Him marrying into the family just cemented it, I think. But I think Hunter would still be in an office position regardless
Yeah.
because of the mind that he has. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Uh,
Very. I mean, and how can you not, being around everybody he's been around with, 25 whatever years it's been since he's been in WWE? How? You know, and being around the old man himself.
yeah.
So,
All right. So that is kind of our big splash into the deep end. Vince McMahon retiring, I believe, in character and in real life. Um,
there'll never be another Vince McMahon, in my opinion.
no.
I've always said there'll never be a Monday Night Wars like there were between McMahon and Bischoff. Something like that will never happen in television again. And if it does during my lifetime, your lifetime, great. I would love to see it. But
Yeah.
for now, I don't think anything can. And the same goes with Vince McMahon. I don't think there'll ever be a promoter in the world of professional wrestling, much like Vince McMahon was and is to this day. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Never.
I mean, this is arguably the biggest news story in all of sports entertainment and pro wrestling ever.
Yeah. Then how long has and Vince always stayed ahead of the curve over the years, and he always did everything better than everyone else. You know what I mean? In terms of being a businessman and the company WWE, always. You know what I mean? There
Yeah.
was always they were always just a step ahead of everyone else, and
Yeah.
I hope now, despite everything else that is going on with him personally, that gets highlighted
Yeah.
more than just the fact that he used stockholder money to pay hush money to these women.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And it really does seem like that is the case, but uh, I don't know. I'm fairly certain that there'll be NDAs involved. Um, Vince is probably, the price he's going to have to pay is stepping away from the business.
the
So
business that he loves, because you know what, if Vince McMahon didn't love it, why would he have been there so long? I gotta believe Vince himself. Not only did he wear the company on his back for so many years, he was the biggest champion for that company. He
yeah,
he of all people wanted WWF WWE to succeed more than anybody. More
yeah,
than anybody. It was Vince. In before any of the wrestlers or whatever, it was Vince. It was his vision. It was his creation. It was his imagination. You know, and he, like I said, he just hired the best people that he could, whether it be the best wrestlers, whether it be the best people behind the scenes, anybody, to make sure that he was a step ahead of everyone else and did it
and he,
better than everyone else.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so this was going to be our episode about ring attire and fashion, and then the idea for this show, we had come up with before here, the end of an era. The wrestling business has been kind of carved apart by by eras, and so this just everything that's happening with Vince and the WWE was just too good to pass up. So we've kind of touched upon what's going on with Vince and the company. Let's go back to other eras in wrestling. Probably the I mean, I know wrestling had a lot of history and it looked a lot different throughout the years, but the 80s into the early 90s, the golden age of wrestling, most
Yep.
notably, headlined by Hulk Hogan and lots of other incredible people. What if you had to put your finger on one match, one event, one person, where did that golden age start? Coming out of the 70s, early 80s, and then where did it end?
Are you talking just the golden era itself?
Yeah, like if you had to pick a definitive starting point for the golden era of wrestling in the 80s, the Hogan era, whatever you want to call it,
With
what was
Hogan,
ground zero for that?
all right, ground zero for WWF was, I mean, it has to, you have to go back to January 23rd, 1984, when Hogan won the title off of Sheik. Like that was the beginning of the Hulkamania era, when that was what got the mainstream really involved in loving pro wrestling the way they did.
Yeah,
That Hogan winning the belt, and then a year later, the hype, the WrestleMania hype, like, and going into that, where you had the 2020 piece, and that actually put more emphasis on WWF and gave more positive news to WWF. They actually used it to their benefit, instead of having pro. I think it was supposed to be a smear piece, and John Stossel ended up looking like, basically the big smear of the whole
yeah.
thing. In
But you're
more ways,
talking about the first WrestleMania at this point.
yeah. I think Hogan winning the belt in that first WrestleMania were the definitive pieces of the WWF being what it is today.
Yeah,
They were the building blocks. They really were, because Hogan was handpicked by Vince to be the guy. Hogan saw what Vince was doing in AWA, saw the crowds he was drawing, and lured Hulk, and Hulk was the golden goose for a long time, and his box office receipts proved it. You
yeah,
know, Now those box office receipts were completely shattered by Steve Austin, a decade later. But
yeah.
nobody, nobody. I mean, Hogan was known around the world before social media was even a thing. Because you got to think, in a lot of those countries, wrestling was all they were able to get through in those countries. Via syndication or otherwise. So everyone knew who Hulk Hogan was,
Did
or that.
Hogan? Go ahead.
What's that?
Well, I
Oh,
was
no,
going
no.
to ask if you think Hogan transcended the business.
Oh, by far, yeah. And it's the proof. I can give you the proof right now, personally, myself. I, San Diego Comic Con just passed. I sent you a message about me picking up the No Holds Barred 2-pack,
I
right?
know that's awesome.
And which I'm very excited. I actually had to go through third party, because it was sold out almost immediately, like 15 minutes it sold out. Of course. But I went through a third party. I got myself a figure. It's on its way, and that just goes to show you, though, that Hogan. I mean, he moves units. He sells. Everyone knows who he is. It's hard to explain, that Hulkamania thing, but it's true. It, he he transcended wrestling in a way to where it's more than, it wasn't less than, you know
Yeah, like I think of um, if you're trying to talk about somebody who's a good basketball player, you'd say, he's the Michael Jordan of his school
Absolutely.
or the Wayne Gretzky.
Yep.
And I'm biased, but it's true, like the Tom Brady. Those are the people that carry this sport on their name. And Hogan,
Hey, love or hate Brady, he has the record. So it's
yeah, yeah,
you
these are
can't.
the people that are iconic of the sports they're in and have gone beyond it. And so I think you're right. Hogan was he is the face of wrestling back when
Yeah.
it became what it is. Here, give me one moment.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Yeah,
But yes, and in a way, and also a man making recent news, Ric Flair, he was the opposite end of the coin. He was in, you know what? He was a worldwide name before Hulk was, because the NWA traveling champion traveled all around the world and wrestled for 60 minutes or 90 minutes all around the world. So
yeah,
Flair was known. Flair was worldwide as well. Um, now, Flair, unlike Hogan, did not have the machine known as WWF and the marketing genius that is Vince McMahon and all the people he has working for him behind a guy like a Ric Flair, you know. But make no mistake about it, as worldwide as Hulk Hogan, just he did not, you know what I mean? Like, and that was no fault of Rick's. It was just the promotion that he had behind him only did so much, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Because they were marketing pro wrestling. Whereas with Hogan, they were marketing everybody.
yeah,
They were marketing men, women, children. He was marketed to everybody. You know what I mean? Whereas Flair was marketed to pro wrestling and pro
yeah.
wrestling. That's the biggest difference, really.
Do you think
Unless,
that this is where you can point and say, here's the split from pro wrestling and sports entertainment?
absolutely, and it was an objective. It was an objective that Vince McMahon wanted to, implement the entire time he was ever in charge of WWF. You look back, he was that celebrity involvement we talked about earlier. I mean, he was, it was questionable to get Mr. T involved, but they got him involved, and they made it important. They meaning WWF, and for the first WrestleMania, bringing Cindy Lauper in, which was extremely important to the product, and to that whole rock and wrestling boom. Uh, you you honestly, I would honestly say, like, if and I had mentioned in previous episode, Captain, that was just a chance coincidence with Captain Lou, and I think
Yeah,
had that not happened, where Captain Lou met David Wolf and Cindy Lauper on the plane, we would not have had rock and wrestling. So it was that was so important to the building blocks of WWF and how we know it today. They shaped it, and Vince over the years has beefed up the production, has embellished upon that original idea more than once,
hmm,
and has constantly rotated great talent in and out of WWF/WWE over the years.
yeah.
So he just the train was moving and he kept pace with that train. It's just again, this is why I cite there'll never be another Vince McMahon, because I don't think anybody else could have. They were too stubborn to think big like that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? No idea was outlandish for Vince. You
Yep.
know,
For better or worse.
right, and he has his faults. You have, for every Hulk Hogan, you have a gobbledygooker. But you know what? Or Red Rooster. But you know what? Those gimmicks are remembered. And that has a lot to do with WWF television and how much that permeated
Yeah.
um, television over the years.
So if Hogan uh, winning the green strap WWF championship from the
Yep,
Iron Sheik
yep.
kicked off the golden age or the Hogan era,
Yep.
Going into the 90s, we have the new generation. Can you put your finger on one match or one person or one event to say this was the death of the Hogan era or the birth of the new generation?
Yep. SummerSlam '92, Brett versus Bulldog. When that main evented, that which was an Intercontinental title match, but when that main evented SummerSlam, that was the turning point for Bret the Hitman Hart and the company.
Mhm.
Where it was proven that that main event can generate interest and an emphasis on the quote unquote smaller guys. Keep in mind, Brett was no small guy. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
234 is a small guy.
No.
And Brett
No.
was Brett was in shape.
Yeah. He
But
wasn't a giant by any means, but yeah, he wasn't a cruiserweight or anything.
No, no. However, he can execute those moves when he wanted to. But Brett was, I think that was the beginning of the new generation era, in my opinion. But even if you go further back, a match that generated interest was Roddy Piper and Bret Hart at WrestleMania 8,
Yeah.
which was just as good as if not better than some of the main events that were on there. Hogan and Sid, for example. You know,
Yeah.
Randy and Rick, I think, was a little, I think it was like that, and Randy and Rick were kind of head to head. But that Brett and Piper match was a great story told. Then to follow it up with him and Bulldog selling out Wembley Stadium,
Yeah.
and that was an intercontinental, and that was proof that the intercontinental champion can headline shows, and
Yeah.
that's why Vince went with Bret Hart. In my opinion, he knew Bret was not only consistent, but he can draw, and the fans believed in him. Even
Yeah.
back then.
And so
So
this was kind of the first time. Well, back then you had the big four pay-per-views, but this was the first time, and my gosh, it 6, 7, 8 years where Hogan wasn't the main event. And not just that, but the world champion was not going on last, right?
it was the IC, and a Bulldog and Bulldog in England being over, that's a no brainer. But Brett really was the star in the match. He made Bulldog look better than Bulldog had ever looked before
Yeah.
or since. That was Bret Hart's match, and that was the stamp, in my opinion, for Vince to say, "Hey, this guy can be the world champion." You know,
I
down
like
the
that.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and hey, and Vince went with his gut, and he was proven correct.
Yeah.
So
Well, and Tim and I have been covering a lot of stuff from this time. We finally just got into 1995, and we're going, uh, yeah, show to show almost with the new generation. So I've had a chance to kind of, revisit all of that uh, with a fresh mind. There's criticisms for the new generation. Um, some of them were pretty silly, but so Bret and Bulldog headline SummerSlam. It was like 70,000 people, right, in Wembley, about.
yeah, yeah, just about.
And
And keep in mind, the main event for that SummerSlam was Warrior and Savage for the world title, like the
yeah,
main event on paper. That's not a chicken shit main event.
yeah,
That is a fantastic main event, you
yeah,
know. But that went on way before, like 3 matches before Brett and Bulldog went on. So
yeah. So Bret and Bulldog um, kicked that off. I think that's a really good point to look at and say, even though Hogan was, still there, and a lot of the 80s main eventers were still there, but so Bret and Bulldog kicked that off. The new generation comes in. Where do you think the new generation ended and the Attitude Era started? Again, is there one spot where you can say this was the death of the new generation or this was the birth of the Attitude Era?
I gotta say the end of the new gener. Well, it has to be towards that later part of 1990. I would say post King of the Ring. and going into that summer of 96 and later part of 96 was where right after, Shawn wins the belt, curtain call happens. We're talking right after Steve Austin makes that infamous promo, which, by the way, that didn't instantly get him over. It still took some doing, and he had to work with Bret Hart. Bret Hart, again, being the secret sauce,
Yeah.
got Steve Austin over to that next level, to where Steve Austin can go off and then draw money. I would say probably that later part of 96 and into early 97 is really the seeds were sown for the Attitude Era, because you had unpredictability with the world title. You had Shawn had it for what, 6 to 8 months, right? Um,
The Monday
loses
Night Wars.
it. Yeah, during the hottest peak of the Monday Night Wars, I might add, like one of the hotter peaks, because we're talking this was right when Hall and Nash jumped. So Shawn was here. He was doing the babyface run. It was not working. That was probably the last of the old school.
The white meat baby faces. He was the
Right. And Shawn, and this was proven when DX really was going hard a year later, is Shawn is a heel. And Shawn is a great smart ass heel.
he
You
is.
know, and we're not talking the Shawn that found religion later and became like basically an elder statesman. We're talking
Yeah.
Shawn end of 96 into 97 going into 98. We're talking that Shawn Michaels. That was the Shawn Michaels that should have been when he won the world title. Imagine how much money he would have drawn. That going against Hall and Nash, that would have been a great counter. You know what I mean? Like, because with Shawn, he was unpredictable too. You never knew what he was going to do, but you knew he was going to do business.
Yeah.
So it's in the ring. Um, I would say, yeah, I have to say that tail end of 96 and into 97, because Shawn had the belt, loses the belt to Sid. Sid's going back and forth with Brett and Shawn, exchanging the world titles, and Austin meanwhile is peaking to where he's feuding with Brett, but he's slowly creeping his way into the main event. And then the Bret Hart thing, which that leads to that great submission match at that
Yeah.
WrestleMania following year in 97, which stole the show. In my mind, that stole the show completely, and might have saved WrestleMania 13, to be honest,
Yeah.
because the rest of the card was pretty abysmal. No offense to the talent that's on there, it's just
Sure.
it was the booking execution was,
Yeah.
uh, with the exception of Brett and Austin, which on paper that match looked lame, but it proved not to be. So, and we've talked about this, and
Yeah.
so that is when that new generation really ended. I think not that 96 into 97 time period, because fans were just starting to get. You have Nitro going on the other side with Hall, Nash, and Hogan, doing some really cool stuff. How in the hell? How in the hell can you compete with that? You know?
You need
How?
Steve Austin. Um, this is also gonna begin the career of The Rock from
Yes.
Rocky Maivia. I remember being at WrestleMania with Tim, watching uh, Austin and Shawn, and the writing was kind of on the wall then. Austin was just too powerful. He had so much heat,
Yep.
and you could see that Shawn was visibly in pain in a lot of his matches. And so I remember with our nosebleed seats watching, Austin's waiting there, and that stunner hits, and eh, I mean, even before Mike Tyson started the count, that pop was incredible. And I know Tim is a longtime mark for Shawn, so I'm sure that was a little bittersweet for him. But I remember talking to him like, this is this is the beginning of a new era in wrestling. It's not quite that cut and dry, but for me, seeing that right there, the Austin era kind of began right there.
Right, and that pretty much was the check mark on the end of that Shawn Michaels run. That he was having, and arguably his promos were great. And his that version of DX was great in my opinion, and he was having some kick-ass matches before the back injury really took
Absolutely.
hold, so arguably, I mean, not one person can go back and watch those pay-per-views and not say that Sean didn't deliver in the ring, because he
Yeah.
definitely did, on his end. um whether or not he whether or not he put over guys,
Yeah.
I lay down for no one, whether that was just being facetious or the truth. I mean, that's a whole nother debate right there. But
That's a whole episode in and of itself.
oh yeah, but Sean as the performer, you couldn't beat him at the time. He was
No.
he was great, and that's one of the biggest what ifs for me, is how he would have, because I think he was one of the innovators of that attitude, that transition, the click members. And what would have happened if Sean didn't clip his back in the Undertaker match, a couple months prior, and then didn't go away for X amount of time, and
Yeah.
actually wrestled and kept that schedule up. Now, by all accounts, that had to have happened butterfly effect wise, because Sean, he was very much, he had his issues with drugs and alcohol, and he, like, for butterfly effect purposes, I guess that all had to happen
Yeah.
for the way it did. But selfishly as a fan, like, what would have, because Sean was such a he was a great heel. Uh, Sorry to excuse my language, but he was a great heel,
I couldn't
for
agree
that time.
more.
And he couldn't have been, and you know what? The rematches with Austin probably would have drawn a lot of money, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Do you remember? I believe it was before an episode of Monday Night Raw where Vince is standing there and he just kind of speaks to the camera, to the fans, and he says that the wrestling fans are tired of having, their intelligence questioned about. Do you remember that little promo? I can't remember what he said exactly, but
yeah. That was the end of '97. That was shortly after the screw job,
yeah,
I remember. And he, opened the creative envelope, so to speak. And, he had to formally address the fact that there was a brand new era coming in, as if we didn't know as fans, because, slowly but surely, if you kept watching the product, they were improving upon, like, talents. They were either repackaging guys into better gimmicks. Storyline writing was getting better. WWE had a way better written show, I would say. Nitro may have gotten the big ratings in '97, but WWE stayed the course, and they had a better written show in '97 than most people, in a storyline arc kind of way, you know.
yeah,
Whereas WCW, I mean, they had the NWO, and then they had all the talent underneath, which, the great cruiserweights and the great Mick Carters and all that stuff. So they relied heavily upon that model. Whereas WWF they were staying the course. They were relying heavily upon, like, great stories.
creative, yeah.
Yes, and great stories being told. You know what I mean?
And as
So
popular as and incredible as the NWO was, those Austin 316 shirts are what made wrestling cool to all the people that were jumping on our bandwagon
yeah,
in this time.
yeah, because Austin was, and there was, I've always said Austin was number one. Rock wasn't too far behind for the number two slot, especially when Austin went down with the injuries at various times. Rock was as popular as Austin. He never quite got that pop like Austin did, but he was pretty damn close, I would say. At Rock at his peak was
Yeah,
close, very close.
yeah. I've thought a lot about that. It's the Austin era. Well, and if you so you have Hulk Hogan,
Yep,
a great, uh, great on the mic, had a really good look, kind of a limited tool set, but he made it work and better than anybody else did.
yep,
And then Austin is obviously the guy who plowed through whatever barriers there were to bring the WWF into the Attitude Era. But
yep,
you see The Rock, like Rock Hogan at WrestleMania, like where they're just having that stare down in the beginning. That is one of the most surreal moments in wrestling for me. But you have The Rock. He's cool, kind of a limited set of of moves, great on the stick.
Yep.
And so he was that guy. And then you have Cena. And that's not to discount any of the other guys, especially Austin specifically. But those are the people that I think of when I think of the face of the company. Those guys that made it cool, could do so much with a lot less than a lot of the other wrestlers and the mechanics and the cruiserweights could do. And I think, in my opinion, I think the Rock did get up there with Austin towards the end before he ran off to Hollywood. My own humble opinion, but I think at his peak he was on the same level as Austin.
Yeah.
Just
I mean, again, Austin, whether he got injured or left at various points, due to creative, or burnout, Rock was there and he was a very strong number two, and then he became the number one guy, and
yeah,
he held his end of the bargain. I mean, and again, Rock had a lot of great guys to work with too. You had your Kurt Angles and your Undertakers of the world. Um, Austin, same way. Like he had his great arsenal of guys that he worked with, mainly Mick Foley, and guys like that. So it's like there it was different than the golden era, I would think, because by
yeah,
that point, WWF had plan B, C, D, and F. You know what I mean? As far as guys, like if an Austin goes out with an injury, they had a
next guy
Rock.
up.
Yeah, they had Rock as a backup. Whereas Hogan was so um, a presence onto himself. You had Ultimate Warrior, who was going to be the heir apparent replacement, but you stuck him in the world title scene and in the main events. He didn't draw, not like Hogan did.
No, not even
No
close.
way, not even close. Sold merchandise, hell yeah, he did. But he was and he wasn't even the plan B back then was Randy Savage. And let me tell you something, Randy Savage had the box office gates too, and he did just fine. I would say Savage was like Hogan's, like if Hogan would be Austin, Savage was The Rock back then. You know
I
what I
like that.
mean?
Yeah,
I like that analogy should apply because Savage was just as strong of a champion as Hulk Hogan was. He didn't get to do it as long as Hogan. That was the only difference. But
yeah,
Savage had the box office gates up there too,
yeah.
because people were interested in what he had to do and loved his character.
And his in-ring performance was very. It was a lot different than what you would see in a Hogan match with all very real respect to everybody. But Tim has uh, Tim has said that Macho Man Randy Savage was the first Mr. WrestleMania before the Heartbreak Kid started calling himself
100%
Mr.
true.
WrestleMania. Yeah,
100% true.
yeah,
And you can't argue his work. Look at 3 with Steamboat. Look at 4 with all his different matches that he competed in 4. Ultimately, facing DiBiase at the end to win the world title. Then you have 5, him and Hogan. They put on this clinic, which and Hogan gets shit for being a wrestler, like for being a limited wrestler. But you go back and look at that match. That Hogan was matching Savage move for move in that match. I
yeah,
don't care what anybody says. And then you had 6 where he made this goofy mixed tag match work. You know what I mean? For all accounts, that match shouldn't have been as good as it was, but there you go.
yeah,
Then redeeming himself the next year with he pulling that match out of Warrior. My
yeah,
God, a WrestleMania 7 career match was a great match between the two of them. Warrior was at his peak as far as physique, and he was working with a guy that he trusted in Macho Man because they were friends outside the ring. So, and Randy being Randy, he made people look good in those WrestleManias.
he
You
did.
know, yeah, he really did every WrestleMania. If you go back, because he had 8 with Flair, which that was a different type of match, and then 10 with Crush ultimately, which he that the Falls Count Anywhere match, which again was goofy, but it worked.
Yeah,
It's consistently Macho Man had always delivered no matter what. And People loved Macho Man, and you know what? It's very telling too, because when he made the jump in '94 to go to WCW, you know, yeah, you had a guy who was on the house shows finally because Hogan had a limited contract and he wouldn't do house shows
Yeah.
at that time, right? But the fans loved Savage and accepted him down in the South better than they ever accepted Hulk Hogan down in the South. You
Yeah.
notice the transition with Savage was pretty seamless, you know,
Yeah.
whereas with Hogan, it was not seamless. So,
After the Attitude Era, we had the ruthless aggression era. For me, the transition from the golden age to the new generation to the Attitude Era was drastic. The wrestlers that you saw, the promo work, the skits, and what was going on. You can pop up any match from those three eras and be able to tell pretty easily where it lands.
yep.
What is the ruthless aggression era as opposed to the attitude era?
So the ruthless aggression era was more emphasized on great athletes, in my opinion, whereas the attitude era was more geared towards pro wrestlers, great pro wrestlers with great storylines written. You know, I think this was more the emphasis on the great athlete because out of this class, this OVW class of 2002 that cranked out onto the main roster, you have a Randy Orton, you have a John Cena, you have Shelton Benjamin, you have Brock Lesnar, you have Batista. I guess which one of these things is not like the other, right? But for as limited as Batista was, they did protect him quite a bit, and for a big guy, he can execute a lot of really cool, crisp moves,
Yeah,
but um, but you know what? In all fairness to Dave, at first they didn't make him more than he was. He was kind of a minor character until he got some seasoning, and then when he was able to go off onto his own, he did. But the four athletes I previously mentioned, even Cena, like in the beginning, man, you had younger, faster, stronger guys in pro wrestling. I mean, with Brock being the top of the pops, he was
yeah,
Brock when Brock was young and in his mid 20s. He nobody could beat that guy. He was jacked to the gills. He looked like a main event star. He was treated as such almost immediately, right out of the gate, and got a push a lot faster than most people. With Cena, it took some doing, but with Brock, it was almost immediately.
yeah.
So,
Well, and Brock played in the NFL. I believe he was a two-time All-American when he was in college. So the athlete in him was very obvious. Um, whereas, well, I mean, even just like Randy Orton, it, Randy did not have the professional athlete background that Brock did. And Randy, and I don't mean this as throwing shade at Randy whatsoever, but like you said, out of that class, Brock stands out. I think because of those things.
yep.
Um, is there a point in time where you can say this was the end of the Attitude Era, or this was the beginning of ruthless aggression?
Okay. So that's a good question. I would have to say at the end of the Attitude Era probably would have to have, in my mind, would have to go to Backlash 2003. Think about this, okay? You had Brock Lesnar versus John Cena in one of the main events, right? And you had Rock, who was going away at the time. This was his last match in WWE before he went and really hit the Hollywood career hard against Goldberg. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Nobody wanted to see Goldberg in 2003. WWE audience, I speak of. Nobody wanted to see Goldberg in 2003. Everyone wanted The Rock to go away at that point. So that was the main event, the big main event of the card, which nobody had any interest in, but everyone had interest in Brock and Cena in that
yeah,
main event. So I would have to say that would be the timestamp for myself where I think of, hey, that this is the end of the Attitude Era completely. And we're now going to emphasize everything on these young athletes. Because if you notice, Brock was consistently headlining pay-per-views afterwards. Goldberg, well, he headlined a pay-per-view or two with Triple H, but we all know how that turned out, right?
Well,
And that
and
that speaks in itself, because Triple H had go away X-Pac by that time, because he was so, his quote unquote reign of terror, like he was kind of the stalwart of that whole Attitude Era. And Goldberg, he wasn't so much Attitude Era, but he was associated with WCW, the old guard.
yeah,
You know what? Meanwhile, you have all this fresh talent from OVW just trucking in. You know what I mean? The great athletes. But in the same token, by like 2004, 2005, you had the Laurinaitis era, where you had like the bodybuilder guys, your Luther Reigns, your uh,
Tom Go.
Tom Coe, your Matt Morgans, all those
Yeah,
guys of the world. So there's a drawback there too. But if you focus on its core with the great athletes that came out of that original class of OVW that came up to the main roster, that I would have to say was the end of the Attitude Era and the beginning of the Ruthless Aggression Era. But John Cena and Brock, John Cena being the heel at the time and Brock being the clear babyface at the time, headlining that Backlash pay-per-view, was it. And then you go back a month further. You go back to the WrestleMania 19, where the main event was Brock and Kurt Angle, and
yeah.
that was clear sign that Vince had faith in Brock and that ruthless era to continue going forward.
Yeah. I like that too, that the ruthless aggression is defined a lot by athletes as opposed to, you know, slapstick stuff that kind of came out of the Attitude Era. Kurt Angle, if you're talking about athletes and guys that were able to go in and put on these incredible matches, Kurt's obviously up there. I think that his match with Shawn Michaels is probably my all-time favorite match.
That ranks right up there. That WrestleMania 21 match between the two of them, yes. And Kurt's a weird one, because he came through during the height of the Attitude Era in '99, but he was able to seamlessly transition with those young athletes in the Ruthless Era better than I've ever seen. And and Kurt was a bona fide main eventer during that time too, and he was an Attitude Era guy for all intents and purposes, but he seamlessly wove through. Undertaker was another one. Undertaker had been through many eras, but it was almost he. You go back to that 2003, 2000. I would say 2002, 2003 time period, whether he was on Raw or SmackDown, but mainly SmackDown, he was making guys. He really was, and Undertaker was very unselfish in doing so.
Yeah.
Again, it was during that period where he was the biker gimmick, the big red, big evil, big red, whatever, the booger red or whatever label they gave him, but really, you go back to the quality of matches that he was putting on at the time, and he was trying so hard to make that next generation actually important.
Yeah.
So Undertaker and Kurt are the two. Yeah, they were through the Attitude Era, but
They made their mark in ruthless aggression.
right. And they were able to take those athletes, which some of them had no right to ever be in that main event level, and make them look like main event players. So, and some came out better because of it.
Yeah. Well, and this is also where, this is after the invasion angle.
Way
But
after.
yeah, but well, and now you have the brand split as well. For
Yep.
me, that's one of the defining characteristics of ruthless aggression. The brand split, red versus blue. They found really interesting ways to kind of weave championships into each other, so that you could have, on the face of it at least, two different promotions going head to head.
Yeah, and I was about to say that the original concept of the brand split was actually a cool one, whereas they were trying to create competition within themselves. But again, that's an idea that was kind of they were trying to recreate the Monday Night Wars with what they had within the company with the two shows, but again, that's where I say there can never be a Monday Night War ever again because it was a real war.
Yeah,
Like you can't something that is organic cannot be created like it can't be recreated. You know what I
yeah,
mean? You can't synthesize it in a formula, especially when Raw is live and SmackDown is taped on Tuesdays to be broadcast on a Thursday or Friday. There's no competition. However, the SmackDown show, I always noticed that the Raw show had the headliners and the guys you really wanted to see on Mondays. SmackDown had the wrestling. Like, so if you were a wrestling junkie, SmackDown was your place. Because you think about it, that was Undertaker making guys, the younger guys, and also the cruiserweights were emphasized on that show.
yeah,
You know, so in that ruthless era. So and for a while, that was the only place you could see the cruiserweights because they were not featured on Raw. It was
yep.
all main event talent and main event storylines and all that stuff. You did not see them on Raw. So
Well, and this time they had uh, you had the world championship and the WWE championship, and
yep.
again, they were trying to recreate the Monday Night Wars, but the cruiserweight champion, the WWE cruiserweight champion, if I remember correctly, was not necessarily relegated to one brand or the other, or was he?
No, but it primarily during that ruthless era, it primarily stayed within SmackDown.
Yeah,
So and it was almost exclusively a SmackDown product. uh, with a couple occasions, but them being on them meaning the cruiserweights being on Raw, but
yeah,
mainly, I mean, like for example, a Rey Mysterio did not nose his way on Raw until well after he won the world title. So he was on SmackDown forever. You know,
yeah.
and Undertaker was on SmackDown because he chose to be on SmackDown, not because you know what I mean? Like nobody made the Undertaker do anything really except for Vince. But
Yeah,
but no, I mean I'm sure it was Undertaker's call to stay on that brand and try to make that brand as viable as possible,
yeah.
you know?
For everything that Taker has done, giving back to the company, giving back to the business, is a standout uh, characteristic of him, I think.
Right.
And so around here, with the creation of the two brands, you have Raw SmackDown champions and SmackDown Tag Team champions, worded a little differently. The World Title, WWE title. Um, then we're gonna hit the end of the 2000s and what is known as the beginning of the PG era.
Yep. Yep.
What what makes the PG era stand out from what we were having for about the last 10 years in ruthless aggression?
Well, having it be more marketed towards kids, which whereas before where, a kid is going okay, so you had John Cena being the leader of this, right? And being as wholesome can be. Never turned heel once, uh, except for that little heel turn that he did, like
I,
that little dance move. But
I know that was brilliant.
that was hilarious, and kudos to John Cena. He's so smart on the promos. But yeah, I I think it was just it was a more wholesome marketed, and that in turn was to get more not only more business deals, within the overall business of WWE, but because they got their licensing deal with Mattel, based
Yeah,
almost based on solely on going PG, but also like toning it back for the rest and focusing more, having it more be having the product be more synthesized. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That synthesized more than it ever was before. And uh, whereas it's really truly a brand as
Well,
opposed to yeah. I don't
well,
know.
and
It's
merchandise would become a big factor, I think, in going PG. Specifically, I think Cena. Um,
Yeah, and he sold a boatload of merchandise. Rey Mysterio, same thing. And they continue to this day. Um, yeah, it was just. I think it was done so that way they were more attractive to advertisers and more attracted to the overall business of WWE. Meaning, like, for to generate as much money as humanly possible.
yeah. Well, and I was going to ask you, around this time, how was business for the WWE? They don't have any more main competition really at all, but not unlike another channel or anything. Do you know how the money was flowing around this time?
Well, they've always had their up and down periods. WWE has. In the case of 2000, okay, so in 1995 they were the most on their ass, I would say. By 1997, they had to take out loans to stay afloat. Meaning WWE, had to take out loans, so because they came very close to going out of business. So because WCW was really killing them. And in 1995, they lost money due to the fact that Vince was fighting the steroid trial and also paying out different various lawsuits.
Yeah,
So the company was lost money. By 97, they were almost on dire straits. Um, Coming back in 98, that set everything up to where, when the Austin era happened, Austin sold more merchandise than anybody. Like, I think he had the merchandise records for years until Cena came along, possibly Mysterio. I'm not sure. I always use those two as an example because they still to this day sell merchandise.
yeah,
um those building blocks were put in place in the Attitude Era, and were ridden out. Because they had their ups with the Attitude Era, and then of course, right after the Invasion angle, business started falling off. But they were still selling. They still stuck with the business model, and they still made money off of advertising and all that stuff. So they were still very much in the game. But
yeah,
by 2005, they had uh, they had just signed that brand new deal with USA. Going back, and they signed a couple other various deals where they set themselves up for more. They figured out, more so than anything, that television rights and really, PGing their product down would really attract advertisers and everything like that. So they would gather more cash that way.
yeah.
So
Well,
regard
and
regardless of like how actual business was doing, they were still making money in other ways. You know,
well, and that's why I asked if you knew how a business was, because that the business has to change with the times, but to going to PG from, and I mean, especially coming out of the Attitude Era, was a drastic change to creative, to guys' careers, to the product overall that, as you said, was being marketed to advertisers and things like that. And so that's why I was asking if you knew if this was driven by necessity, or if they were just changing with the times to make sure that they don't have to take out loans to pay the talent anymore.
I think a bit of both. Like they knew they had to, and let's face it, WWE, for better or worse, has always wanted to get their eyeballs on, like, their product on the most eyeballs humanly possible. And now, and ever since 1999, they had to appease stockholders,
Yeah.
whereas before they were a family business. In 1995, they were a family business. In 2005, they were not. So it's a whole different beast now, and those other deals put in place, whether it be for merchandising, whether it be for television rights, advertising rights, or whatever, were done so they can really boost their stock for those set stockholders in WWE, and
Yeah.
really really, has the product suffered for it? I would say it suffered for it for a long time creatively, but business, I mean, they've always done great business,
Yeah.
regardless.
Well, and I think again, merchandise seems like a big factor on why they would do that. But if they are a publicly traded company, or if they became one, you know, like we talked about in the beginning, then you have a board of directors, you have investors that you have to answer to.
Yep.
And so, yeah, if you had to look at the PG era and put your finger on one person, one event, one moment that ushered in the PG era or ended the ruthless aggression, what would your choice be?
I would have to say, the ruthless era probably ended around like 2010 time frame. I would say. Um, it had gotten to the point where it was, uh, well, you gotta think too in context, where a lot of that stuff, I mean, how many bra and panties matches can one have or see or whatever? You know what I mean? That continued
Yeah,
well into the ruthless era, and the a lot of stuff that was just played out to so much. And they in 2010, they were trying their best to get back into wrestling, and what brought them to the dance is wrestling. Um, but again, the trade off was the product suffered going forward from that point on. Like creatively, because a lot of the storylines became very silly and very catered towards children. You know what I
yeah,
mean? But I'd have to say 2010. I would you go back to that period in time. It doesn't have to be one event or whatever, but to that you go from 2009 to 2010. uh, you can see a big difference in the product, whereas like before it was, but going forward, I mean, by like 2011, 2012, it was so to the point where it was anything cool, like the CM Punk, for example, the CM Punk storyline, was the pipe bomb, so to speak.
yeah,
People always point their finger to the pipe bomb, and that was CM Punk's way of saying, "Hey, this product sucks." You know what I mean? And
yeah,
we want to see something. And but CM Punk ended up turning into a merchandise machine of his own in his own right, and kind of riding that wave of being a babyface for forever. They changed his formula almost overnight too. So, and
yeah,
that's what that time period to me represents. A lot of what if potential, but a lot of start stops. You have CM Punk, you have Zack Ryder getting a grassroots movement with social media and really being on the ground floor with that, and only to be completely squashed. CM Punk's run, you go from being this hot, almost attitude era type character to being this we want ice cream guy, there was a lot of just start stop things wrong with WWE, and creatively the product did suffer because it frustrated a lot of guys. Cody Rhodes being one of the bigger examples, because eventually they turned him into Stardust, a
yeah,
second coming Goldust, and he gets so frustrated with the company and creative, he leaves and creates AEW, with Tony Khan and all that. So, but is now it's full circle. He's now back.
Yeah.
So, and how ironic that now he's back and they go TV 14 again. So,
Maybe there was uh, some planning into that. Um, I think the transition from ruthless aggression to PG was a lot more subtle.
but
Um,
and two, okay. So when they were doing those big ratings, I'm going to interject this real quick. When they were doing those big ratings, what did they have to compete with on television? What did they have? They had Friends, they had Law and Order, they had, you know what I mean? Like they didn't have as much television to compete with back then as they do now. And especially now with streaming, because, you have your Netflix and you have your Amazon Primes of the world and your Apple TVs that are just killing it with the content, So now WWE has to compete with not only real television, but real content also. So you have to factor that one in as well,
yeah.
with the PC, the PC era there,
Mhm.
uh, so that had a lot to do with it too, as far as stifling, because you have this really silly product next to, like, say, an American Horror Story or a Walking Dead or Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Like shows like that are competing with wrestling.
That's true. I've never thought about that, but yeah,
And
the whole landscape of consuming media, like we had
yes,
talked about before, was
right.
now
And these shows are written with not only like more emphasis on like character development, but storylines that are arcing, and seasons that are arcing even, and series that are arcing even. So it's like, they are so ahead of the curve now in comparison to a pro wrestling show where, yeah, you're bringing in the Hollywood writers on the creative team who don't know anything about pro wrestling. They know how to write for Hollywood, but they don't know how to write for pro wrestling
yeah,
because they don't understand what a character is in pro wrestling. They're used to Hollywood and actors. Wrestlers are not actors. They're part actor. They're like
they're
this.
performers.
They're performers. Yes. So and somehow that got lost. And also, again, like I said, there's so much to compete with now. It's not just wrestling and here's wrestling, here's television, and this is where it ends.
Yeah,
No, it's so different now. And you also got to factor in real sports too, like your UFCs of the world, or your even like football. Football is king in the United States. So, when football season comes, everything stops, as you know.
yeah,
So, it's there's too much to compete with now, you know?
yeah. And those battle lines from years previous, where this show or this product or this company was competing against another one. Um, Again, thinking back to our media consumption show with streaming and social media, everybody's competing with everybody now.
Yeah. So if you're pro wrestling, how are you going to compete? That's the thing, and that is the question that everyone is trying to answer. Now, with the recent news of WWE going TV 14 again, that's great, but what are you going to do with it? You know, how are you going to how are you going to follow it up? You know what I mean? What
Well,
are you going
and
to put in place?
yeah, the uh, the next era after that is called the reality era, and I look at that. The reality shows WWE was doing, you know, um, this was a really clear case that they were diversifying their portfolio, um, and keeping everything. They can do everything, but not everything just has a wrestling theme attached to it. It isn't necessarily just one show or one event. Um, is there anything in your mind? And again, I know that these eras, especially around here, do really kind of blend together. But um, is there one moment around PG reality that you could look at it and say, yeah, this is the definitive change in the business model for WWE?
Yeah, when I remember when Total Divas premiered. That's when it really changed. Meaning, like, uh, you were having that was kind of like uh, they were trying to compete with like your Keeping Up with Kardashians of the world and other reality shows that followed. Um, uh, the thing is, okay, so the thing is, wrestling has always been a scripted reality product. You know what I mean? Almost from the get go. It's just it's its own weird entity. You know, like
Yeah.
scripted reality. I, I love finding out that like people were like, oh, with these reality shows, oh, it's all scripted. It's like you couldn't watch it and figure that out yourself. Like I think one of the few things that wasn't scripted was like say like the original season of The Real World, for example. You know, like that was not. I don't think that was really scripted in any way. I just think a lot of that had to do with clever editing in post. You know, but
Yeah.
but you know like but they edited it to where but that's no different than anything else whether you watch a documentary or whatever where they edit it to suit the narrative of what they're trying to get across, you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah. There's nothing
reality,
real about it.
right, and just like there's nothing real about reality television. I mean, they diversify their portfolio. They did Total Divas, which I watched also, and it was a humongous success. Now it's led to Mr. and Ms., which is the Miz reality show, which you know, and he comes from that reality show background, you know, as we both know.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna say that's kind of a full circle for
yeah,
the Miz right there.
yeah. So if anybody knows about that field, he does.
Yeah.
So, but also he's now a tenured pro in WWE. So he's no pushover when it comes to that, and it's no coincidence that he is and his wife are the stars of that show. So,
Yeah.
um, I just think it was more of a. I just think like that reality show route or the reality era was more another just another thing to attract, you know, advertisers and
And so,
you know
would you
and to
say that?
create content, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. If there really was a drastic change from PG to reality, or if they were just kind of watering down the product so it could be sent out into different types of media. Social media. You kind of water it down so you have more of it, but the product does suffer. Like I remember seeing a shoot interview with Kevin Nash, and they were talking about adding Thunder and how hard it was to write for 5 hours of wrestling a week, and
Yep,
now there's my gosh, 18 hours, something like that nowadays to keep all of that going.
yep.
Um, but I don't really think that there was, like I said, a drastic change to the product itself. It was just being bottled and packaged to different audiences.
Right. And you know, they were hitting that reality show audience, whether I mean it was no coincidence that Total Divas was broadcast on the E Entertainment Network, which also was home to Keeping It Up with the Kardashians, which was the biggest reality show on that channel, like by a mile.
Yeah,
Uh it was more and it was called WWE Total Divas. So they're selling the brand. You know, they're selling the brand to advertisers and to the networks. That's all they're doing. It's business. So
when did they start the WWE network?
2004. Oh, well, okay. So the seeds were sown probably like early on. In fact, I think Vince had the idea in place. Uh, he had the idea in place probably around like 2012. But it didn't officially like. There been a lot of because they were trying to figure out because this is when streaming was first being introduced really, and
Yeah,
trying to figure out like how they can get, and also taking time to digitize a lot of that content, which they had a good majority of for the WWE on demand that existed, but not for a whole network. No. So they officially launched in February of 2014, I remember, and it was a big deal at the time, you know, because their streaming platform, and they waited the 2 years, so they were getting all the bugs out basically
Yeah.
in the 2 years, because their streaming service was actually a lot better than a lot of the majors, to be honest, as far as interaction and, you know, like use, everything. It's just it was heads and tails better. They had the idea back in 2012. I know that much, and it was to their benefit that they bought all that content. They originally bought all that content for home video purposes, you
Yeah.
know, but they saw that the home video market was on its way out and streaming was on its way in back
Yeah.
10 years ago, you know.
Yep.
So
That was replacing, uh, having even just having physical media. Everything is nowadays just digitized, and so yeah, I like this because there's a lot of callbacks to our media episode.
but
Um,
you know, with that said, when WWE Network came out, I remember people were selling their collections left and right. I refused to, because I knew that whether it was them themselves or if they were to like become a conglomerate one day and be sold to an even bigger media company, which that was starting to happen, because, you know, you had Amazon that was buying up catalogs, you know, of content as well. I knew that with becoming a conglomerate, there was a price where you're gonna get the footage, yes, but it's gonna be not the footage you remember. So, or it was gonna be edited, or something was gonna be missing, or whatever. That's why I always held on to my content, because I knew, instead of getting pissed off about it, you can go back and I can just take one off the shelf and, hey, this is how it was, you know. But
yep.
I think that's what makes a lot of people mad, was they did it for the convenience of having WWE Network on the go, but and not having this nut in their collection that was the collection. They sold it off. It was the same. See, and I learned my lesson early, like back in my tape trading days when DVD first came out. I just thought, oh man, WWE's going to go hard and they're going to put everything out on DVD, right?
Mhm.
Wrong. They put out probably a fraction. They did. So, me trading off all my VHSs and getting rid of my VHSs was the worst thing I could have ever done, because all that content was lost. I had to go back and I had to recollect it, you know? And I
Yeah.
learned my lesson on that one. I was like, I did not want to do that again. So,
And yeah, you are a very uh, a very big archivist, preservation living. I mean, even just looking in the back of your room right there, and I know that that is like a fraction of everything that you own.
yeah, everything's piled in different places. So, yeah, I'm a pack rat for sure. But, you know, it's all in the name of pro wrestling, right?
Yeah,
Actually, all in the name of content. I have movies galore too, so it's you know, and music, so it's you know, it's all forms of media all in between, but yeah, but
yeah,
pro wrestling is the biggest emphasis, yes.
yeah. So the reality era kind of bleeds into what they're calling the new era, I believe, and now that um, they're going to go back to TV 14, and with the sudden departure of Vince from the company, it'll be interesting to see what changes are made going forward with Nick and Stephanie at the head
Yep.
of the company. It seems that if we are going to touch on like the end of an era, and I know earlier on I was really trying to get you to, you know, put your finger down and say this was this and this was the beginning or end. Um, just in like the last year, you had texted me about the Undertaker going into the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
And I mean, that's the end of one of the most prolific eras in wrestling history.
Yeah. It's a man who spanned multiple eras. So yeah, in a way, symbolically, it was the end of an era for sure. You know what I mean? And not on the same level as Vince, because Vince, I mean, it's
Yeah,
his creation. That's a different. We discussed that, and that's a different ball of wax. But you know,
yeah,
for performer side of things, yes, because you know you got to think the Undertaker lived through everything. You know, the Hogan era, the Golden era, the New Generation, the Ruthless, the Reality,
yeah.
the PG. I mean, Undertaker was very much involved in every era imaginable. So you can,
I mean, he
uh,
main evented every single one too.
yes, and you know, did what he could to give back to the business, as well as basically keep his character strong over the years. So, which he was very successful at, and I don't think there's any other character that is quite like him in WWE lure. You know what I mean? And again, that was a Vince McMahon creation. You know, Vince came up with that Undertaker character and was looking for the right performer to pull it off. And thankfully, he did. He found it in Mark Calloway, and he pulled it off for decades.
Yeah,
And you know, that was the beginning. And then you had Triple H with his heart attack. That was the second blow. You
yeah,
had Nick Khan coming in and the releases. Well, that may have happened before the Triple H thing, but you had Nick Khan coming in and his business model approach being different. You
yeah.
had Vince now, so it's Undertaker started kind of that ball rolling on you know the end of an era, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, he really was in all of the eras that we talked about.
Yeah.
So I've kind of picked your brain about, you know, here is an era here, it's defined here, people call this here. Um, Maybe thinking back to some of the performers you were talking about, like Taker going into the Hall of Fame is an end of an era. Maybe not one of the, you know, storied ones, but a big one for the fans. Triple H as well.
Mhm.
Are there any other ones that stick out that maybe don't land directly in a transition from one era to a next, but um, maybe it was an era of their own that was really significant?
Are you talking? You're just talking in the lure of pro wrestling in WWE,
Yeah.
or you?
Well, no, like you know, Ric Flair's last match is coming up, but I think you know his maybe an end of an era of his career was this match with Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
Um,
2008, and Flair was still he could still go back then. Like this was before he almost died, and his well documented injuries.
yeah,
And other personal stuff that has happened in his life. So
I would look at Montreal as you know the end of an era. You know things like that. Are there any ones that we haven't talked about that really kind of jump out to you?
yeah, Pat Patterson passing. That was
Yep.
an end of an era in its own right because Pat had a lot to do with just various, just a lot of direction that WWFE went in as far as he was the guy in charge of every finish. He was Vince's second in command for booking ideas and whatever. Pat worked around the clock with Vince McMahon, booking backwards from WrestleMania the next year to WrestleMania that year, and they would work
Yeah.
backward from there. So, and at various points, you had Bruce Pritchard and you had JJ Dillon in the office too, but it was always Vince and Pat. And I think once Pat passed, that was, and that was even before Taker retired fully and all the stuff that's happening now. Pat passing was important because me while he hasn't worked up for WWE full time in years, his opinion was still important enough to where Vince had him around for a number of years, and a lot of the younger talents learned from Pat. Just in terms of how to tell a story in the ring, uh, creative ways for finishes, and story arcs. That was the genius of Pat Patterson, really, because he was very smart that way, you
Yeah.
know. And he, just when you think every idea has been exhausted, Pat would always pull something out of his hat, and you know what I mean. You'd be like, "Oh my God, that's genius," and
Yeah.
uh, and Vince, of course, played off of Pat, where he would tweak ideas too. So Vince was always a great tweaker of if a performer or say a Pat would come with an idea, Vince would tweak it to where it would be just
Over the top and
over the top, great idea, and the belly laugh, I love it, you know.
um, I think back to the last episode of Nitro and how I was informed as a fan then, without there being a website or a hotline to call. It was just such a surprise to me that it opens up and this is the last episode. Vince, they're on. Vince is on that show. He's doing his little bits. Um, that was really just kind of surreal at the time.
Yeah,
Um,
that was an end of its own era because the Monday Night Wars officially ended that night, and and keep in mind, I would say probably the end of '98, going into '99, 2000, 2001 were not great times for WCW, but they still had great talent under under contract, and they still competed every week, and they would get 2 million, 3 million viewers a week. So that's not anything to shy away from.
yeah,
Well, I mean, keep in mind WWE was getting like sixes and sevens at the time, sometimes eights and nines, but still, they had 2 million viewers every week glued to this product, and that speaks volumes because AEW gloats over getting 1 million viewers now.
yeah,
And yeah, that's all fine and good, but WCW during its dying days were getting 2 million, 3 million viewers. So what does
yeah,
that say about WCW? You
yeah.
know?
Any other notable ends, maybe for eras in wrestling or some of the boys their professional era?
Uh, beginning of the end. Let's see. Some would cite some would cite when Jesse Ventura got the uh what was it, he was implying like the guaranteed contract thing, which was later adapted by Hall and Nash. Some would say that was the beginning of the end of the way the wrestling business was structured from there on out, and they might be about right, to be honest, because here Hall and Nash hired entertainment attorneys and were able to
Yeah,
negotiate these sweet deals. Hogan being the exception because he had his own deal, and his deal. And what's funny was Hogan's deal was with Turner. It was not with or Time Warner. It was not with um, WCW themselves. So
I did not know that.
yeah, well, and then other guys later followed suit, the Hall and Nashes and all that stuff. But Hogan's deal before that, it's very similar to how when TNA was was really under the Dixie Carter regime, how Hogan got signed to Panda Energy or Kurt got signed to Panda Energy and not Impact. You
They
know
were
what I mean?
signed to the parent company and not the promotion.
Right. So they were guaranteed their money regardless of how the business came about. However, for the young wrestlers, I mean, they weren't making much. So by comparison, but whose fault is that? Is that the wrestler's fault for taking so little, or is it, you know what I mean? Like, who's at fault there for that? I
Yeah.
don't know. So,
Awesome. Any closing thoughts?
um, just that my closing thoughts on this week. I mean, and we didn't even dive into the Flair thing, which Flair. I'll say this, okay. Flair, this is marketed as his last match, and he's 73 at this point, and Buddy Rogers was 71 before he passed, and he was ready to don the tights yet again, you know, and in a dream match against Ric Flair, ironically enough, back in 1992 or three or whatever it was, right? That was the proposed match, and that ended up not being. Anyway, uh, Flair being the end of an era, it's the end of. Is it his last match? I don't know. I mean, how long did Terry Funk wrestle? Wrestle, you know,
But yeah, pushing into your 70s though, even by today's standards, is
you know, and to be fair, Flair has some freaky genetics, you know, like, and always has, and he's always been in great cardiovascular shape among any wrestler. And if anybody can wrestle at 73, even if it's to take limited bumps, I think Flair can do it.
yeah,
But uh, you know, you have the end of an era with Ric Flair, and this is happening the same weekend as SummerSlam, which is Brock and Roman. Uh, Again, and Brock is a source of controversy as he's walked out of SmackDown and has come
yeah,
back. You know, thankfully cooler heads have prevailed, and you know, we're getting our main event, so
yeah,
that's nice. But
yeah.
my
Very
thought,
exciting times.
yeah, and that's what I was about to say. That's my overall thoughts. Is wow, what a time to be alive right now in pro wrestling in 2022, because we're seeing things we thought we never would see in our lifetimes, you
Yeah,
know? And we're talking people retiring, we're talking people stepping away, we're talking new people in power, we're talking old faces just, you know, it's just it's a
it's a
lot to take. It really is a lot to take in, but it's
yeah,
man, you know, I don't think we're ever going to forget. My closing thoughts are: I don't think we're ever going to forget this time in era of pro wrestling right now, summer of 2022. It is an exciting time right now, and
yeah,
you know, the most exciting time is the unpredictability.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think there are just so many. I mean, really big, very important uh, wheels that are turning throughout the business, and some of them are kind of breaking and being thrown off. And I mean, I don't know what the business will look like a year from now. I don't even know what it'll look like in 6 months. Part of me is, as a lifelong fan of this, I have a lot of concerns. Um, I really do try not to be overly cynical about stuff like this, as much as I was when I was younger. But I, I mean, we're Vince McMahon retires and Flair has his retirement match within a couple weeks of each other. Um,
mm,
it's it's we live in very interesting times.
yeah, and you know, Flair being a draw in 2022. I mean, you know, you know, here's a guy who was as many years as most of the wrestling public would like to say past his prime. He's, you know what? He's more relevant, and he's still doing it now at 73.
Yeah,
Vince McMahon couldn't be more relevant right now, whether it's for positive reasons or negative reasons. I mean, you know, we're talking two polarizing figures right now that are in the headlines, and
yeah,
yeah,
they're in the headlines in a way that they probably won't ever be again.
no, and wow, I love to see how this all gets followed up, because again, too, the TV 14 thing, that's only one part. You know, like, it's how are we going to follow up with this? You know, because automatically just I don't think automatically just saying, "Hey, we're TV-14 now," is going to fix anything with WWE.
Yeah.
They really, if they really they have the. I've always said they've had talent. It's now what you do with it, and how do you write for them, and what do you come up with, and how do you start from scratch with the guys and girls that you have.
Yeah.
You know, how do you do that? That's the biggest question right now is how and what, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know that there has really ever been a time in the business that the business will change so drastically in such a short amount of time. It is surreal.
and to interject too, this could be my closing thought. Other eras we saw pretty much coming, right? This era we have not seen coming. so
Oh,
so and hopefully I don't know where this is going, but you know what? I'm glued and I'm interested. So
yep.
that's
Perfect.
for sure.
All right. Thank you.